Hello, and welcome to this afternoon's issue briefing on tourism in Latin America and the Caribbean, looking at how the industry can bounce back after COVID-19. My name is Madeline Hillier, and I work on the media relations team here at the World Economic Forum, and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. First, I'd like to thank everyone who's joining us online as an attendee. We really thank you for tuning in. And to our friends in the press, we're looking forward to taking your questions in the second half of this issue briefing. So please remember to put your questions in the Q&A box, and please include your name and the name of your organization when you submit. Also, for everyone joining in, we do have interpretation as an option during this session. You'll see an interpretation button towards the bottom of your screen, and you can pick the English or Spanish channel. All interpretation today will be from English into Spanish, as the panelists will be speaking in English. And that brings me to our wonderful panelists who we have joining us today. We're very grateful to be joined by a group of true leaders in the travel and tourism industry, and looking forward to hearing their insights into how COVID-19 is really changing the industry and what we can expect to see as we try to recover from this health crisis. With that, I'm going to turn to my colleague Maxim Shoshkin, who is a research and analytics specialist in the Future of Mobility platform, focusing on travel and tourism research. So Maxim, you're releasing a report today on travel and tourism competitiveness in the Latin America and Caribbean region. And you also released a report last September looking at global travel competitiveness. Can you tell us what your research is showing about the changes between last September and today?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Madeline. And maybe I'll first kind of discuss a little bit about why we wrote this report, and then I'll be able to address that. So, COVID-19 is above all a health crisis. There's very much ongoing, and the priority should, of course, be given to ensuring people's health and safety. The Latin American Caribbean Tourism Competitiveness Landscape Report, which we're launching today, looks at how the COVID health crisis has and will shape the travel and tourism industry, which is very important for Latin America and the greater region. The industry accounts for 10% of GDP and a similar share of jobs, and therefore play an essential role in how the region builds back and its long-term development. And competitiveness in travel and tourism will play a critical role in all of this. The report itself takes a look at, as you mentioned, our 2019 Global Travel and Tourism Report, and specifically the Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Index, which measures the set of factors and policies that enable sustainable development of the travel and tourism sector, and which in turn contribute to the development and competitiveness of a country. And the overarching categories that we look at are things such as enabling environment, travel and tourism policy and conditions, infrastructure, and natural and cultural resources. Now, some things haven't necessarily changed, since COVID. So Latin American Caribbean has several things going for it as far as tourism competitiveness, especially regarding natural resources such as wildlife, UNESCO natural sites, and so on. Our results show that out of the world's top 35 scorers for natural resources, 10 are in Latin America. And that's about half of the countries covered in this report. And before the crisis, the region was also doing really well in international openness. Of course, that's before all the restrictions. However, since the crisis, two competitive factors have increased in importance, according to our findings. That's health and hygiene and ICT readiness. Many Latin American Caribbean countries have issues with healthcare infrastructure and access. For example, compared to the rest of the world, the region on average has 42% fewer hospital beds per 10,000 people. This indicator of capacity means that lockdowns might have to be extended, so not to overwhelm the healthcare system, which would delay the reopening of an economy and rebuilding of the travel and tourism sector. ICT readiness, on the other hand, is more important because the digitalization of services, facilitation, and overall commerce will also get more prevalent as person-to-person contact is reduced. So here the region actually improved over the past several years at a faster rate than the rest of the world, but it still lags in areas such as business to business and business to consumer digital transactions. But however, even before the crisis, the region also scored just below the world for overall travel and tourism competitiveness. There are more traditional travel and tourism competitiveness challenges that the region faces, such as unfavorable business environment, safety and security issues, and underdeveloped infrastructure. For instance, on average, the region scores 46% below Western Europe when it comes to ground and port infrastructure. So these issues will make it more difficult for the region to compete in the post-COVID world. But the crisis also highlights the need for maybe greater resiliency. So there is now an opportunity for decision makers to look at the current competitive landscape and come up with the strategies that both help the industry in the short term, such as looking at healthcare and ICT readiness, and push towards a more resilient, sustainable path.
Thanks, Max, for that insight into the Latin America region and where its travel and tourism competitiveness stands after COVID-19. I'd like to turn to Manuel Butler, the Executive Director of the United Nations World Tourism Organization. Manuel, your organization certainly has a global look at tourism, I would say. So I'd like to ask you, what are the top 2 or 3 projected COVID-19 impacts on tourism in 2020?
Thank you very much, Madeleine. First of all, for us, it's a pleasure to be here sharing with so distinguished speakers, and of course in an event of the WEF event. We have produced at the beginning of the month of May three cases scenario for the whole year 2020. That we thought that it was something that everybody needs to have a guidance, to have because this COVID-19 crisis is an unprecedented crisis. We've produced previously two figures, project figures that they are outstanding, that they are tremendous. And then we through this crisis we have from 100 to 120 jobs at risk, and the loss in exports because of this crisis only in the year 2020 will be between 900 billion US dollar or up through 1.23 trillion million dollars. Coming for these 3 possible scenarios that we have produced for the whole year and will be updated in October for the coming year, we have seen that independent of the travel restrictions, the key issue, of course, they are the health situation of each country, that it is a health crisis. Finally, depending on the travel restrictions, they are put in force because the COVID-19 crisis for the different countries, the international tourism numbers could fall between 60 and 80% this year. That's has an unprecedented fall that has nothing to do with the previous crisis. They were only to remind everybody that with economic crisis, the fall on international arrivals was only 4%, and we are talking now about between 60 and 80%.
That's quite the fall, and it certainly is unprecedented. So thank you, Manuel, for giving us those insights. So that's the global perspective, and I'd like to turn to Lorna Atile, the head of cross-border for Latin America and the Caribbean at Visa, to give us a bit of the business voice on this perspective and maybe look forward a bit. While we're still in the midst of this health crisis, many businesses are looking forward to when travel restarts. So Lorna, I'd like to ask you, how do businesses in the travel industry need to prepare for the rebound in travel?
Thank you for the time and for inviting me to participate in this forum. I think that we need to look at trust, confidence. They're going to be key for the recovery. and secure digital payments are going to be essential. What we have seen is that consumers are um, drastically changing to digital payments. But not just the consumers, we are seeing also small businesses adapting digital payments, online travelers being more efficient. Just in the LAC region during the COVID pandemic, we've had 30 million new users that for the first times are using e-commerce. And we think they're going to be expecting to have that same experience when they are doing travel and pre-booking. I don't think they're going to come back and do that booking face to face. We also have conducted several studies in the LAC region about how they think about traveling in terms of consumers. And what the consumers are saying, they are eager to travel, they miss traveling, but they feel that they're traveling locally first. They are going more to beaches, 60 miles away from home. And by the end of the year, they're expecting to travel locally, fly locally. We don't expect, or they don't expect based on their findings, that they're going to be traveling to US or Europe before 2021. So how are we doing to address those concerns? First, I think we need to focus more on that experience, which is tap and go. Okay, tap and go that have a touchless experience for the consumers, which is being adapted 60% globally. And the US has accelerated the adoption during COVID, similar as to the Latin American and Caribbean region. So we need to focus on that digital payment experience. And of course, what that means for the tourism organizations, that means that we need to put education behind the labor force of the tourism in our countries so they don't understand digital payments. So definitely consumers are changing behavior, and we are seeing a huge acceleration in digital from the US and Latin America. We have huge impact in terms of tourism for the Latin American region.
Thanks, Lorna. And you mentioned consumer confidence at the start of your remarks. And I'd like to ask Martin Ernekian, the CEO of Corporación América Airports and the chair of ACI World, a bit about that. So I would imagine that consumer confidence is particularly important in air travel during this time. And I wanted to ask you to see, how are airports and other forms of travel infrastructure responding to the crisis and the new health needs that need to be met now?
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. As everybody is listening nowadays, every part of the value chain of the travel and tourism ecosystem, airlines, airports, we are all trying to respond to this uncertainty and this fear that has been imposed into the public by the threat of the pandemic. So in terms of physical measures, what we're seeing is everybody trying to take a very proactive approach, doing different things, different measures, from taking temperature to passengers to increasing the sanitation protocols. But this is at the local level. What I think is most complicated in this pandemic scenario for the industry is the fact that the world leadership has reacted in very different ways, and we do not see a comprehensive approach or any organization that is being able to take leadership in create world standards to bring the trust back again to the traveler. So in the airports that we run, we have very different approaches. We have governments that have decided to close borders completely, governments that have decided to close internal borders completely, others that require quarantine to everybody that comes into the country or that moves within the country. Countries that are requiring 100% of passengers to take tests for COVID-19. So the uncertainty in the science regarding such a new pathogen and the fact that everybody is reacting in a different way, I think that is what brings this crisis to such a height in our industry, bringing it to such a stop at the same time. I don't think there can be other way to approach it, but now that we are into it and that we can understand better what is going on, I think the next really important step to be able to restart, beyond the measures that everybody's taking locally in terms of sanitation and protocols, is worldwide standards on how to restart. Those are the ones that are going to really make the public understand what they have to do, how they have to do it, and when they have to do it. And as Maxim mentioned, and also Lorna, the digitalization that has played a huge role in enabling societies during this pandemic has to come into play in our industry as well. We need these standards to come and bring the industry together with the enablement of the digital tools that are already there to bring this comfort and trust to the public. This can only be done with a lot of collaboration, with the industry working together in a way that works for everybody and not and is not the benefit of a part of the industry going against another part of the industry. This has to be done in a very open and collaborative way, because what we need to gain is the trust of the public, and the digital tools are already there. What we need is leadership to bring all this together and all the industry together to be able to restart as fast as possible. We all know how important the travel and tourism industry is. How many jobs in LATAM is about 7 million jobs and more than $150 billion to the economy. And all of these regional economies need this industry as soon as possible. Of course, we see a ramp up in how passengers can restart. We see numbers from different organizations that go from 2022 to 2025 in terms of reaching the numbers that we used to have in 2019. And the way to bring this that recovery into the present, I think, is by having leadership really work with the industry together to create new standards for everybody to understand and get trust. I think WEF can be a great enabler for that.
Thanks, Martin, and thank you for joining. I really do like the point that you bring up about the need for kind of cross-industry collaboration, as there are a lot of uncertainties now. And so I want to turn to Maribel Rodriguez, the Senior Vice President of Membership and Commercial at the World Travel and Tourism Council. Maribel, your organization really does work across the industry, and so I wanted to get your perspective on what changes you envision in the travel industry, kind of across the whole sector, as it becomes safer for countries to reopen their borders. What changes should we expect?
Well, more than what changes, because if we're going to do some changes, we have to be all working together and be aligned. What we will be seeing is that if we are not working together in a collaborative way, as Martin was mentioning, we have a potential baseline of losing 1.6 million jobs in the region, and a downside of 2.2 million jobs in CALA region, and 6 million jobs in LATAM in the baseline, or 10 in the downside, considering that we measure direct, indirect, and induced. So, because it's very, very important for the LATAM economy. Right now is 8.1% of the global GDP in the region. So that's why very important. What we are doing now, and based on the past experience and on what we have been looking to the recovery time that we need to go back to normal, in the 2011 and 1, we took 26 months, and now we are in 2018, when we studied 90 crisis, we analyzed that 10 months was the time to recover. So what we are using this figure is to know how to recover faster right now. To do so, what we need is to have a public-private collaboration to use the digital experience and the seamless traveler experience to make sure that the passengers and the clients and the customers are back to travel in a better way, to use global standards and protocols, and that is why we have been working alongside different verticals, and now we are up to 11 global protocols to make sure that we are all aligned, working private and public sector, and embrace the technology. So those pillars are really, really important to recover faster, because there will be a pre-vaccine and a post-vaccine. And in the meantime, we need to carry on. We need to be working. We need to live with COVID right now, okay? And the only way to do that is to be working together. So that is very important, and why we have been creating those global protocols, and of course the safe travel stamps, and that has been approved by different destinations, countries, and other organizations we have been working with, like UNWTO, of course, IATA, ICAO, CLIA, etc. So for us, the key thing is how to build the traveler confidence, because now we have to go and start opening up our economies again, and we have to make sure that the traveler is doing in a right way. And when they are doing so, they need to know that the way they go to Spain or to Argentina or to Mexico, they have the same standards. It's the only way to recover them as fast as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Maribel, and thank you to all of our panelists for those remarks. We're now going to turn to the Q&A portion of today's panel. So if you're a journalist on the line, can you please remember to submit your questions through the Q&A box with your name and organization, and we'll answer those for you. So the first question I have today is from Furman Coop from Buenos Aires Times. And his question is about regional travel. Could we expect travelers to choose local and regional tourism close to home first and return to longer distance flights later on? Maribel, maybe you could tell us, is that what you're expecting, or not yet?
Well, basically, there is two things here. One is when the different countries are opening and at what time, okay? And then because not all of them are in the same pandemic phase, not everybody is going to be opening up at the same time, mostly in the region. We can look at the experience in Europe right now, and we have to learn from that. In the beginning was a little bit of not a very coordinated way, because different countries say different things. Now at the very last end, they started to kind of being aligned and open with 1 or 2 weeks difference. But this didn't mean that now the bookings are coming back, okay? So that is very important, the messaging we are giving to the consumer. And when it comes to the regions and Latin now, of course, we have to go first to domestic, then to regional, and then the international. So that is the process we need to follow. And for that reason now is making sure that internally the flows are coming up, then working together another countries to make sure that you are moving those flows. And then when the international travel is starting, you have already prepared of this base. But what I would, we will like you to suggest is to look at what is happening in Europe, because not because you are opening right now means that the people is ready to travel, and we need to do it in a proper and coordinated way.
Thank you. And maybe since this does touch on air travel, maybe I can turn to Martin and ask you, are airports preparing in any way to have shorter distance regional flights first and focus on longer distance later on? Where do you guys stand with that right now?
I think as airports, we are always ready to service any needs in that regard. Some surveys suggest that people can be more confident flying domestically first and then internationally. If you think of health insurance, if you've traveled far away from your home and you get sick, what is your insurance? Things like that, according to surveys, come into mind when people make decisions. But we also start also seeing numbers on bookings where people are starting to get confidence and start to feel the new normality, because we hope for a vaccine, and when that comes, basically, I think everybody will be in a different mood. But while we do not have it, I think we need to adjust to this new way of living. and not stop the way we were before. We need to adapt and move on, and this is what's required from the industry now.
Great, thanks, Martin. I have another question here from Ulysses Navarro at G21 Comunicación. And his question is, what concrete actions can authorities and governments take to help the tourism industry? Maybe I'll turn to Manuel and Maxim to get us started with that. Manuel, does your organization have any recommendations, or are you seeing any success stories for how governments are supporting the industry reopening?
Yes, the first thing that our SG, the WTO SG, was to call a committee crisis in order to coordinate the response and to harmonize the response worldwide. There was a very good response. The WTTC was there, WHO, and so forth. And the first thing was to produce a list of recommendations divided in 3 blocks. The first block was for the survival of the industry with measures, monetary and fiscal measures, and thereafter to regain the trust we have seen in the case of Europe, easing the travel restrictions is not all. We have to regain the confidence, the trust of the consumers. And the third, of course, to build for the future, to know what we have learned of this crisis. And we have ordered in 7 priorities. The 7 priorities, they are approved by this committee. This committee was representing the whole tourist world, private and public, all the stakeholders were there. And they regain these measures to protecting jobs, to the survival of the companies. The second one was to regain the confidence on the basis of the health is the primary thing. And of course, the coordination and open borders with responsibility, that's no going to backwards. And of course, creating new jobs with add value new jobs, taking in account the current crisis to make a better tourism in the future. And of course, building the new normality based on 2 pillars, the innovation and the sustainability.
Great, thank you. It's really interesting to hear about those principles and ways to take action from the government side. Maxim, I'd also like to turn to you on this question. In your research, do you have recommendations for governments, or what should policymakers be looking at in this current context?
Yeah. Well, I think Manuel hit upon a lot of the points here. The coordination and setting out standards and protocols and so on are going to be very important. And I think on top of that, communicating that to travelers is going to be vital. You could implement all of these policies, but if travelers aren't aware of them, they might still have some doubts. And part of that is obviously going to be really focusing on showing that the countries are handling the health crisis, because health safety is going to be such a vital component of travel decisions going forward. And obviously there's other areas of improvement from like a big picture point of view, improving the business environment, such as taking care of administrative barriers and regulatory barriers and tax practices, and providing financial support and other kinds of support to the industry is going to be very important for it to survive for this period of time. And then I think that there's a certain, Latin America has this advantage of natural resources, and a lot of that is obviously away from the major densely populated cities. And I think moving a lot of infrastructure investment, or at least prioritizing or increasing focus on areas outside of the major cities, could also be beneficial, because travelers are going to want to go to places with fewer people, and it's also going to be a way to incentivize investment in more rural communities.
Great, thanks Maxim for adding that context. I have a question here from Martina Putrelli from Infobay, Argentina. Her question is, will travel post-pandemic become a luxury experience only available for some? So I think I'd like to turn to Maribel and Lorna to answer this question. So Maribel, across the industry, are you expecting travel to remain accessible, or will it become more of a luxury option?
No, well, tourism is very resilient, so we will go back to where we were at a certain point. What we need to do is to be coordinated and build again the traveler confidence. And going back to your comments before, it is very important to do testimonials, to talk to the consumer, to explain them what they have to do right now. And there will be a before and an after the vaccine, as I was mentioning. That is why it's very important to work on global protocols, safety stamps, and standards that the consumer understand that it's very easy to travel. The only thing they have to follow is new rules. That's why it's very important as well that everybody is working together and accepting the same framework when it comes to reduce the risk and isolate the potential people with COVID, with using the testing, the contact tracing is very important. That is one of the things we are working now to ask countries and governments to use the same framework to do that, so people would be a little bit more confident when it comes to travel. And of course, as I said, we are resilient. We will go back to travel again. And it's a question of when to do this. If we have been helping the companies to be there, if we have done the financial resource for them to be surviving there when we are back. So there is a lot of things that have been mentioned already for Manuel and for the rest of the colleagues here in the panel today, because of course we are able to go back where we were. So, but building this trust is very important. And
Thanks,
we are all part, including media.
Yeah. Our study that we conducted now in June says that the thing the consumer miss most is traveling, okay? And they're willing to travel even 60 miles away from home. That means creating little bubbles around the LAC, traveling from one country to the other, maybe before by car because of the COVID, but they are willing to go back and travel, and they are looking forward even into travel for the next years in their aspirations. So I think that provided the right price and the right for them to afford that, I think consumers are going to continue to travel. They miss it. That's what they are telling us.
Great. Thanks, Lorna. I have a question here from Javier Leonet from Hostel Tour. He is wondering, are airports seeking government packages to help their financial viability? And if so, how is that support changing what passengers should expect in 2020 through airports? So maybe Manuel and Martin can take this question.
Yeah, we are working very closely with ICAO. That's the authority, the agency of the United Nations for civil aviation, and of course with ACI and IATA, and to restart opening the airports. That's the key issue. That we know that air connectivity, it's like the blood that's the flows through the whole ecosystem, tourism ecosystem. Of course, they have to implement measures, extra measures for the health in order to make sure the health condition of the travelers, and at the same time we have to distinguish between the pre-vaccine and the post-vaccine. Yeah, the pre-vaccine will be stronger measures in this way. I think Martin can detail more in detail the measures that they are going to be implemented, and of course some of these measures it was happened after the 11th September with the security measures. They will stay forever there, but not all the measures. That's a very important issue. What's around this this conversation or this forum about the standards, the global world standards. They are on the same line and meaning the same for everybody. And I would say that we have defined framework standards, and we have worked together with the WTTC has produced these safe standards, and they have declined these standards for the time being, that because the urgency of the situation. But of course, we have working of the ISO standards as well. The ISO standards, they take times. That there are a lot of experts there, and they will produce the standards for at the end of the year or beginning the next year. And it was not the case. The urgency of the case, we have to meet these standards now. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Manuel. Martin, do you have anything to add on to that?
I think that this pandemic has brought a huge economic downturn for I think most countries in the world, and our industry has been hit probably one of the worst in this overall really complicated scenario, and in terms of the possibility of governments to help industries or help the economy are key for the fast recovery of any industry, and this is where LATAM is probably weaker or more exposed than the developed countries in terms of the ability of governments to help the economy overall and industries that have been hard hit more individually with economic measures. So if you see the US, the US has brought aid package for airlines of around $50 billion and for airports of around $10 billion. And governments across Europe have taken different measures to help the industry as well. But there have also been overall measures in the economy to restart and to move the economy and not let it sink as fast as we might see in Latin America. I think that is the biggest challenge that we probably have in Latin America: how to really create incentives in the economy and in our industry for this crisis not to hit as hard as it could. But I think this applies to overall economy and all industries. Of course, the travel and tourism one more closely because it's directly affected by this. So we'll see what the responses of each government are. But the way to go out faster of this crisis is with help and collaboration.
Great, thanks, Martin. Maxim, I have a question here from one of your statements on health in Latin America. This is from Juan Scolo at La Divi Medios. He says, Maxim, you said that Latin America's health competitiveness is 42% below the global average. Is it a uniform diagnosis for all Latin American countries? Could you expand the data to the country level a bit?
Yes, the 42% was actually referring to hospital bed density, which is one of our indicators for the healthcare infrastructure within Latin America. And Latin American countries do typically have an issue with access and infrastructure as it relates to healthcare. I think most countries on their ranking do, for the overall healthcare and hygiene score, rank in the bottom 40% of the global ranking. But there are exceptions to this. For instance, Argentina actually leads the region when it comes to, for instance, hospital bed density. They have well above the global average. I think it's something like 50 beds per 10,000 people, which is more than twice the Latin American average.
Great, thanks, Max. And I will say that if you have questions specific to the report data, you can follow up over email as well. So I have another question here from Delfina Torres at Del Dario La Nacion. What expectations do you have for airlines? Do you think that many will disappear during the crisis? Does anyone have any projections or thoughts on what might happen to the airline industry? Maybe Maribel, have you been hearing?
I was going to mention something. What I can tell is that the airlines are the backbone of the travel and tourism industry. Without them, there is no connectivity, and the number of tourism will decrease, so it will be affected. So for us, it's very important that we can see that the governments are understanding how important the travel and tourism sector is, and they provide the support necessary for them to be there, to maintain the workforce, the work resources, and to make sure that when we are ready, we can reestablish operations normally. Of course, there will be a restructuring of routes and facing, but it's very important that we support them. I can give you a couple of examples of countries that have been supporting pretty much to their sector. As well, a country that has been boosting the economy and the tourism economy, for example, in the case of Italy, giving money to every single Italian to travel within Italy, which was boosting the domestic demand, which would be a really good idea to keep a little bit alive the industry and all the employments. As well, France, for example, giving $18,000 million for the sector to help them, because at the end of the day, they are number one in number of tourism receivables, and that is what is going to be keeping them alive. Travel and tourism in the recession in 2008 was the one that was supporting the global economy. Thanks to them, we could maintain, and countries like, for example, Spain, where Manuel and me we live, we saw that very clear. So it's why we have not just remember the travelers when they are not there. We have to plan for them to be there. We have to plan and work with the different companies, and it's almost 10.3% of the global economy. 1 out of 10 jobs in the planet. Last year, one out of 4 jobs of new creation was because of our industry. So we have to think a little bit long term. Of course, right now we are in a big depression, big crisis, but in long term, when we look there, it's going to be very important that we now support the private sector to keep being there. That is as well, not only for airlines, but for the rest of the value chain.
Great, thanks, Maribel. So we're coming up on the end of the session. We have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to bring back a point that was discussed earlier about the need for somewhat of global standards and global coordination in recovery. Prior to the COVID-19 crisis, emissions and sustainability were an important topic in the travel and tourism industry. How do we expect sustainability to be included in these opening guidelines to kind of ensure the long-term resilience of the industry? And anyone can jump in here.
I mean, I could say something quickly and let some time from my colleagues, but before COVID, digitalization and sustainability was in the agenda of every government. What is happening now is that it's going to be accelerated because of the current situation. If you are not doing any efforts now to be sustainable, this company is not going to be competitive. This country is not going to be competitive. So any company that is now investing, supporting these areas, they are going to be the ones that are going to be succeeding. So that's very important now to understand. It's all accelerated now because of the current situation, but that was something already that was in the agenda of every single country.
I would like to add to Maribel that's I completely agree. You have to be sustainable in order to be competitive. But coming back with the standards, international standards, we as a United Nations agency, we are working for 3 years in a standard measuring the sustainability in the three axes: economic, social, and environmental. I am sure that this work that we are doing, and I will approve, I hope next year by the UN Statistics Department, that the social, by the way, the social aspect is the hardest to define for lack of data for the difficulty to define the sustainability of the social sustainability. And I think that is the most important. You have to think about the shame of flight. It was on the previous pre-COVID of the over-tourism, the so-called over-tourism. They have a very strong social component. But coming back, I am sure that thinking that we in the new normality, and the new normality is accelerating all these mega trends that we have already mentioned, incorporating the sustainability in the index of the competitiveness. That's something that has to be done. But I think that next year we'll have this standard measuring the sustainability. This a work jointly together with all the member states, members of the United Nations, member states of the organization, with the private sector, with the WTTC, with the OECD, with all relevant stakeholders worldwide. And I hope that this standard will approve next year in March.
Great, thanks Manuel and Maribel for that. That does bring us to the end of our time, and so I just want to thank all of the panelists for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and the insight you were able to offer to our audience. And I'd also like to thank the audience for joining us today and for the excellent questions you submitted. If you have any further questions on the report or other things at the World Economic Forum, you can feel free to reach out to me directly afterwards. So thanks again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their afternoon. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.